What if a wounded golden dog appeared at your door in the middle of a snowstorm and refused to leave until you followed him into the forest? What if what you found inside a half-buried cabin changed everything you thought you knew about fate, family, and the past we thought was lost forever? Whispers in the Snow. Hey there. Before we begin, tell us where in the world you're listening from. Drop it in the comments. We'd love to know where this story is finding a home tonight. The wind howled like a wounded thing that night, clawing at the eaves of the old mountain cabin as if trying to peel away the walls of solitude Claire Donovan had built around her. Snow had been falling for hours, thickening into silence, the kind that muffled the world into stillness. Inside, only the creak of old wood and the occasional sigh of the fire reminded Claire she was still alive. She didn't mind the quiet. In fact, she'd sought it out after everything that happened back in Asheville, after the fire that took more than just buildings. Her scars weren't all on the outside, and some nights the silence was the only thing that didn't ask her questions she couldn't answer. But then, somewhere around midnight, a sound cut through the storm, barely a whisper, a scratch, then another, faint but desperate. Claire froze. She reached for the flashlight and cracked the door open, expecting maybe a fallen branch or the wind playing tricks. Instead, there he was. A Labrador, pale yellow, soaked, bleeding, eyes like stormlight. And though every part of his body shook from cold and pain, he met her gaze with a calm that was almost human. He didn't bark, he didn't whimper. He just waited, as if he'd come looking for her, as if he knew she was the only one who would understand what came next. Blue Ridge Mountains, North Carolina, late February. The storm had rolled in fast, burying the world in a thick, relentless hush. Snow fell in great silent sheets, smothering every sound except the low, grumbling wind that pushed against the cabin nestled deep in the pines. The nearest town, Spruce Valley, was miles away, and even there, roads would be impassable by now. Claire Donovan preferred it that way. Distance was safer, silence even more so. Claire, 36, sat cross-legged on the worn rug beside her stone fireplace, a chipped ceramic mug cupped between her hands. She was tall, with strong shoulders and a lean frame shaped by a decade as a firefighter. Her chestnut hair, now trimmed blunt to her jaw, held faint traces of gray near the templessa, premature gift from smoke, loss, and grief. A faint burn scar traced her left wrist, just under the wool sleeve of her thermal. The worst scars, though, were the ones no mirror could reflect. 3 years ago in Asheville, a warehouse blaze collapsed around her team. 3 men in, only 2 made it out. Claire had survived barely. Her partner, Jack Marston, hadn't. Since then, she hadn't worn a uniform, hadn't stepped into a city. Her retirement was quiet, unofficial, and wrapped in self-inflicted exile. The mountain cabin had been her uncle's before he passed, and now it was her sanctuary, a place where no one asked questions, and the only voices were the trees, the fire, and the wind. That night, the storm was a living thing. Snow howled sideways through the trees. Ice cracked against the windows. The fire popped softly in its hearth, and Claire let her thoughts drift into the flames until she heard it. At first, she thought it was the wind warping again. But there it was, deliberate. A scratch. A pause. Then another. Not sharp. Weak. Desperate. Claire stood, muscles tense, setting the mug down without a sound. Her hand reached instinctively for the flashlight on the counter. She flicked it on, the beam slicing through the dim cabin. With a steadying breath, she crossed the small living room to the front door. Her heartbeat had already begun to quicken, not fear. Not quite. Something older. Instinct. She unlatched the deadbolt and cracked the door open, wincing as a blast of frigid wind tore through the room. Snow rushed in like breath held too long. Then the beam of her flashlight caught something low, slumped near the steps. A dog. No, a Labrador. pale yellow, muzzle flecked with ice and dried blood. Its coat was once clean, now crusted in places with mud, thorns, and something darker. Its eyes met hers, wide and quiet, colored a deep honey gold rimmed with white from the cold. It didn't bark, didn't even whimper, just waited. Claire opened the door wider, her voice quiet but firm. "Hey there. You alone?" The dog's ears twitched. He tried to stand, but one of his front legs buckled beneath him, sending him sprawling with a faint whine. That was all the invitation Claire needed. She crossed the snow-slick porch in 2 strides and knelt beside him. Up close, she could see more clearly gashes along the rib cage, one shoulder torn open. Deep cuts, old and new. And yet, even as he trembled, he didn't shrink away. "You poor thing," Claire murmured. "Okay, let's get you inside." She slid one arm under his chest, the other beneath his hindquarters. He was heavier than he looked, maybe 70 pounds, but she carried him with the practiced strength of someone who had once hauled full-grown men out of fire. Inside, she laid him gently on a blanket near the fire and shut the door against the storm's roar. She worked quickly. Years of field triage never left her. She cleaned the wounds with warm water and iodine, carefully trimming the matted fur. The dog didn't resist, just watched her with those patient eyes, as if he knew she meant to help. Some wounds were shallow, others deep. She didn't think he'd been hit by a car more likely animal attack. But the longer she cleaned, the more inconsistencies she noticed. Several cuts were too clean, not from teeth or claws. Something or someone had hurt this dog intentionally. She felt a pang stir in her chest, unexpected. It had been so long since she'd cared for anything. But now, hands working steadily, breath fogging the air, she realized her eyes were stinging. She whispered, "I'll take care of you. You're safe now." The dog's tail twitched slightly, not wagging, more acknowledgement. Claire smiled faintly and reached for a dry towel, gently drying his head and back. His body relaxed, bones settling into rest he'd clearly been denied for days. She placed a shallow bowl of water near his nose and a few strips of leftover chicken she'd saved from dinner. He sniffed, licked once, then rested his chin back on the floor. Claire sat back on her heels. "You need a name, don't you?" The storm continued to beat against the windows. The fire cast long flickering shadows across the room. She studied the dog's fur like sunlight on wheat. Warm, even in this cold. "Sunny," she said softly. "That fits." His ear twitched. Claire chuckled. "Okay, Sunny, let's ride out this storm together." She sat beside him, sipping her now cold tea. Her eyes drifted to his once more. There was something strange in them, not wild, not afraid. Something watchful, intentional. Like he had come here for a reason. And for the first time in years, Claire didn't feel entirely alone. The storm had passed, but the snow remained, blanketing the forest in ghostly white silence. The air outside the cabin was clear and sharp, sunlight bouncing coldly off the icicles that lined the eaves. Inside, Claire Donovan stirred her coffee absent-mindedly as she watched Sunny, still weak, but no longer resting. The Labrador sat rigidly by the front window, his golden fur catching the morning light like sunlight buried in snow. For the 3rd day in a row, he stared toward the tree line, unmoving. His wounds were healing. He was eating, drinking, even wagging his tail now and then. But something had shifted. It wasn't restlessness, it was purpose. Claire had seen that look before in the eyes of firefighters staring into a burning building, already calculating their next step before orders were given. She approached him, coffee forgotten. "What is it, boy?" she murmured. Sunny didn't react. He didn't bark or whimper, just continued to gaze into the trees as if he knew something she didn't, as if he were waiting for her to finally understand. By mid-afternoon, Claire couldn't shake the unease. She packed a small backpack flashlight, gloves, scarf, a thermos of hot broth, her folding knife, A flaren slipped her arms into a heavy parka. Sunny stood the moment she touched the doorknob, tail raised, eyes alert. "You want to go, don't you?" she asked. Sunny stepped forward, nose to the door. Claire looked at the forest beyond, then back at him. "All right, show me." They stepped into the snow, the cold biting at her face like needles. Sunny took the lead instantly, not like a dog on a stroll, but like a scout retracing his steps. His gait was confident now, purposeful despite the still healing wound on his right shoulder. Claire followed close behind, her boots crunching softly in the snow as they wound through the trees. An hour passed, then two. The light grew dimmer, and Claire marked their trail mentally, noting natural signposts. A split cedar, a large boulder shaped like a crouching bear, the sharp bend of a frozen creek. Then she saw it. Nestled in a small clearing, half buried under snow and ivy, stood a cabin or what remained of one. The roof sagged in the middle. The windows were boarded from the inside. Smoke hadn't come from its chimney in weeks, and yet Sunny stepped forward with a whine, his paw scratching gently at the door. Claire approached cautiously, hand resting near her pocket knife. She knocked. No response. She circled around. Near the back, she found a basement storm hatch partially cracked open, ice flaking from the hinges. She drew her flashlight and eased it open. The beam revealed a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The air that wafted out was stale, tinged with rot and something else, something human. Claire descended slowly, Sunny close behind. Inside, the basement was cold and damp, lit only by her flashlight's narrow glow. The beam passed across stacks of dusty boxes, an overturned chair, and then stopped on the shape in the far corner. An old man, lying on a thin cot, chained to a radiator. Claire rushed forward. The man stirred faintly, eyes fluttering open. His skin was pale, thin as paper. A silver beard framed his gaunt face. His breath came in wheezing rasps. Sunny whined and moved forward, licking the man's hand. His eyes fluttered again. Then hoarsely, "Sunny, you made it back." Claire dropped to her knees and checked his pulse thready, but alive. "Sir," she whispered, pulling out her thermos. "Drink this, just a little." She helped him sip the broth, her hands trembling. "I'm Claire. I followed your dog here. You're going to be okay." The old man gave a dry, broken laugh. "Sunny didn't just run. He went to find help. Looks like he did." Claire noticed a leather satchel on the floor nearby, half covered in a wool coat. She lifted it gently and unzipped it. Inside was a small journal, brittle with age. Flipping through, her eyes caught the name Walter Granger, archaeologist. Dozens of sketches, coordinates, old symbols, notes on burial sites, artifacts, tribal boundaries. One page read, "I fear Travis will return soon. I wouldn't tell him where the map is, so he left me here. Says he'll come back when I've changed my mind." Claire's stomach turned. She helped Walter sit up, supported him with her shoulder, and began unhooking the chain from the radiator. "Let's get you out of here," she said. Walter closed his eyes briefly. "There's a trail north of here, faint, leads back to a ridge above the main road. But I don't think I can walk far." Claire looked at Sunny. He stood already at the door, watching them both ready to lead again. The man was barely breathing. Claire stood frozen for a heartbeat in the doorway of the derelict cabin, her breath catching at the sight before her. The room smelled of mildew, cold wood smoke, and the sharp tang of human neglect. The bed in the far corner was nothing more than a sagging frame beneath threadbare blankets, and beneath them lay the form of an elderly man-frail, sunken and frighteningly still. A rusted chain snaked from the iron bedpost to his left wrist, the metal cuff biting into skin that was raw and mottled with purple bruising. Sunny whined low in his throat and took a hesitant step toward the bed. Claire followed, every part of her training flaring into focus. "Sir," she said, kneeling beside the bed. The man stirred, lips cracking as he tried to speak, but no words came out, only a faint rasp. His eyes fluttered open, pale, gray, and cloudy, but there was awareness there, flickering like a candle on its last inch of wick. Claire pulled a pocket knife from her belt and cut through the length of ragged blanket, then reached for the multi-tool in her coat. The lock on the cuff was old and corroded, and after a few tense minutes, it popped free with a sharp click. She caught his wrist gently as the weight of the chain dropped. "You're safe now," she whispered. "I'm Claire. This is Sunny. We're getting you out of here." His lips moved again, but she couldn't make out the words. She pressed a hand to his forehead. It was cold, dry, and clammy. Hypothermic, starved, dehydrated. She needed to get him back to her cabin before sunset, or he wouldn't survive the night. The journey back was brutal. Claire carried the man on her back for part of the trail, though her muscles screamed in protest. Sunny walked ahead, occasionally circling back, his energy steady despite his recent injuries. They stopped twice, once so Claire could warm his hands against her skin, once to check his breathing when it grew so shallow she feared it had stopped. By the time they reached her cabin, night had fallen, and stars shone dimly behind a veil of cloud. She settled him onto her bed, stoked the fire higher, and wrapped him in every spare blanket she owned. Only once he was stable enough to rest did Claire allow herself to sit, her legs trembling beneath her. Later that night, after forcing him to sip warm broth by the spoonful, she noticed the leather-bound notebook that had been tucked beneath the man's coat nearly hidden. Water-damaged and worn soft by years of use, the pages were filled in a tight, looping hand. She read by firelight while Sunny lay at her feet, eyes never leaving the man in the bed. His name was Walter Granger, a retired archaeologist, 78 years old, slim, medium height, with a long white beard now tangled and yellowed by weeks of filth. His face, when clean, revealed sharp cheekbones and once expressive eyes now dulled by fatigue. According to the journal, he had once worked for the North Carolina Historical Society and had made several significant discoveries tied to early Native American trade routes and sacred ceremonial grounds. But his last expedition had been different, hidden, a find he hadn't reported. One entry stood out. "I never told them. Not the board, not the university. Only Travis." Claire's brow furrowed. The name appeared again and again in the later entries. Travis, described at first as a nephew taken in during hard times. Troubled, reckless, and hungry for more than Walter could give. The tone shifted in later pages. Anger, fear. "He says the map belongs to him now, that my work should benefit family. But what does he know of the Cherokee, of the covenant with these lands? He wants to sell it. Parcel it out like kindling to the highest bidder." I told him no. Claire turned another page. "He took my phone, took my satellite transceiver. Says he'll leave me here until I agree. But I won't. I'd rather die in this place than betray what that site means." She looked up from the journal, gaze meeting Sunny's. The dog stared back, unmoving, as if waiting for her to put it all together. "You knew," she murmured. "You escaped. And you came looking." She reached down to scratch behind his ears, and for the first time since she'd brought him home, Sunny leaned into her touch fully. No hesitation. The next morning, Walter stirred. Claire sat beside him, carefully lifting his head to offer sips of water. He blinked up at her with some awareness now, his voice faint but steady. "You're the one the dog found," he said. Claire nodded. "I found you because of him. He led me." Walter's hand reached out blindly until it found Sunny's fur. The dog pressed close, his tail thumping gently. "Good boy," Walter breathed. "You made it." He fell back against the pillow, exhausted, but a small smile remained on his lips. Claire squeezed his hand, then looked again to the journal. The truth was clearer now, painted between the lines. Walter hadn't just discovered something valuable. He had uncovered something sacred, and someone had tried to steal it. And somewhere out there, Travis was still waiting for a decision Walter would never give. Claire didn't know what she'd do yet, but she knew this: she wasn't letting it end here. The snow had stopped falling 2 days ago, but the silence it left behind was heavy, expectant, like the deep breath before a storm's second strike. Claire stood on her porch in the brittle morning air, her eyes scanning the narrow trail that cut through the trees beyond her cabin. She had the unease of someone who felt watched, though the woods remained still. Inside, Walter Granger was slowly gaining strength. The old archaeologist had managed to sit up on his own that morning, and though his voice was still raspy, it had grown firmer with each sentence. Claire had brewed black tea and insisted he sip it while she read more of his journal, piecing together the quiet war between him and his Nephua, war waged not with fists, but with manipulation and isolation. Sonny, ever watchful, had taken to guarding the cabin door. The Labrador barely left Walter's side except to patrol the windows and doorframe. His usual warmth had given way to something colder, focused, protective. Claire didn't blame him. The more she read, the more dangerous Travis Granger sounded. Travis had been taken in by Walter after a troubled adolescence marked by juvenile theft, academic suspension, and an arrogance that clung to him like smoke. The journal described him as tall, broad-shouldered, with slicked-back blonde hair and sharp, calculating eyes. Walter had tried to believe his nephew could change, had taught him about archaeology, even brought him on an expedition, until Travis discovered how much ancient history could be worth in the wrong hands. Claire had just returned from collecting more firewood when she heard the crunch of footsteps in the snow. Not animal, not Sonny, heavy, confident, human. She reached for the old hunting rifle that hung just inside the doorframe. Something left behind by her unclean stepped onto the porch, Sonny instantly at her side, ears up, body tense. The man who emerged from the trees matched Walter's description to the letter. Travis Granger was in his late 30s, broad and solid, wearing a parka far too expensive for a hiker, and carrying a smugness that made Claire's skin crawl. His breath clouded the air as he stopped at the foot of the porch, taking in the cabin, then Claire, then Sonny. "Well, would you look at that?" he said, his voice smooth and too loud for the quiet morning. "I figured someone must have dragged the old man off. Didn't think it'd be a woman with a rescue complex." Claire didn't lower the rifle. "Back up." He raised his hands mockingly. "Relax. I'm family. Walter's my uncle. I know who you are." His smile faltered slightly. "Then you know he's not well. He's confused. Dangerous even. I came to get him some help." Claire didn't flinch. "You chained a 78-year-old man to a bed in an unheated cabin and left him there to die. That's not help." "You don't know what you're talking about," Travis said quickly, the charm in his voice cracking. "He's not mentally stable. He was hallucinating, hiding things, talking to that damn dog like it was human." As if summoned by the accusation, Sonny stepped forward, a low growl rising in his chest. His eyes locked on Travis, posture rigid. Travis took a visible step back. "You." His voice dropped to a mutter. "I thought." He didn't finish. Sonny's growl deepened, and in a flash, he lunged. Claire barely had time to react. Sonny clamped onto Travis's arm knot hard enough to break, but firm enough to send him stumbling backward. Travis shouted, trying to shake him off. Claire yelled, "Sonny, back!" and the dog obeyed instantly, retreating to her side but still snarling, tail stiff. Travis held his arm, face twisted with fury and something else fear. "You trained him to attack me?" he barked. "I didn't train him at all," Claire said. "But it looks like he remembers exactly what you did." She moved quickly, the rifle still at the ready. "Turn around, hands behind your back. You can't be serious. You trespassed on private property, threatened an elderly man's life, and nearly killed his dog. Don't test me." Claire moved fast, grabbing a length of rope from the porch and binding his wrists behind his back. She'd learned knots from her wildfire team secure, quick, and not easy to wriggle free from. Travis spat a string of curses but didn't resist further. "I'm calling the sheriff," she said. "You'll regret this," Travis snapped. "You don't know what you're involved in." Claire didn't respond. She pushed him toward the living room, away from the front door. Walter, still weak, looked up from the bed, and when he saw Travis, his eyes darkened. "It's over, Travis," he said hoarsely. "You old fool," Travis hissed. "You'd rather let it rot underground than let us benefit." Walter didn't answer. Claire turned to grab the portable radio from the counter. It needed charging, but if she could reach the ranger station or even another homestead, they'd have help soon. She didn't see Travis shift his weight until it was too late. His elbow caught the edge of the table, sending the oil lamp flying. It hit the floor and shattered, and in seconds the flame licked at the fuel-soaked rug. Sonny barked. Walter shouted. Claire dropped the radio and reached for the fire extinguisher in the kitchen. But the flame was already spreading, hungry for dry wood and forgotten newspapers piled beside the hearth. "You idiot!" Claire screamed, trying to smother the nearest flames, but the fire surged, angry and fast. "We need to get out," she shouted. Walter nodded, already trying to push himself upright. Claire turned to grab the blankets for him, and behind her, Travis made a break for the door. Sonny didn't let him get far. The dog charged again, this time knocking Travis flat. Claire lunged, dragging the old man from the bed and toward the back door, Sonny covering their escape as smoke filled the cabin. Outside, the cold hit like a wall, but it was a mercy. Claire pulled Walter into the snowbank, shielding him with her coat. Sonny stood over them, panting, eyes still fixed on the door. Behind them, fire crackled and roared. Claire's cabin, her sanctuary, was burning. The fire behind them raged louder than any storm Claire had ever faced, its heat chasing them like a beast through the snow-laden woods. The night sky was black but glimmered faintly with stars. The cold air so sharp it cut through every layer of clothing like a blade. Claire's lungs burned as she carried Walter on her back, his frail body bundled in a wool blanket, barely conscious but alive. Sonny darted ahead, pausing every few yards to glance back and ensure they followed. Claire had left Travis behind. There hadn't been a choice. With the fire spreading too quickly and Walter's life in immediate danger, trying to restrain or drag the man along was a gamble she couldn't take. She had shouted a warning as she left, but Travis's angry coughing had already been swallowed by the smoke. The snow had begun to fall again light this time, more like a veil than a threat. But it would not stay gentle for long. Claire could feel it in the way the trees leaned into the wind, in the tremble of the air just above the ground. "Hang on, Walter," she panted, shifting his weight as she followed Sonny deeper into the forest. "We're almost there." Sonny seemed to know exactly where to go. With a confidence that belied his earlier injuries, he led them down a narrow path between rocks and bramble, Paws sure over frozen ground. Claire's boots crunched behind him, her every step fueled by instinct and grit. Then, through the trees, she saw it. A hollow, low to the ground, hidden behind a curtain of vines and brush. Sonny pushed through the snowbank and disappeared inside. Claire followed and emerged into a shallow cave, barely high enough to stand in. It wasn't deep, but it was dry and shielded from the wind, the kind of place animals would take shelter, or people running from flames. Claire gently laid Walter on the smoothest patch of stone she could find and unwrapped his blanket. His face was pale, lips bluish, and his breathing ragged, but his eyes fluttered open. "You found it," he rasped. Claire knelt beside him, placing both hands around his to warm them. "Found what?" "This cave," he murmured. "I mapped it. Years ago. Used to be part of an old Cherokee trail. I always thought if it came to it, this would be where I'd go." Claire looked around. It was no accident. Sonny had brought them here. She turned to the Labrador, now lying just inside the cave mouth, his chest heaving from exertion but his gaze locked on Walter. "You knew," she whispered to Sonny. "You really knew." Walter's hand shifted weakly, brushing her arm. He's smarter than most people. Maybe smarter than both of us. Claire gave a half smile, trying to blink away the sting of wind and emotion. She reached into her jacket and retrieved a thermal pad from her emergency kitoni of the few supplies she had managed to shove in her coat as she fled the cabin. She activated it and pressed it gently against Walter's chest. "Let's warm you up a little more." He stared at her then. Really looked. "You said your name was Claire, didn't you?" "Yes." "Claire Donovan?" She hesitated. "Yeah. Why?" Walter's breath caught, not in pain, but in recognition. Her name was Ellie Donovan. She would have been around my age now. Red hair, sharp as a blade, brave as hell. We lost touch years ago. After her brother died, she moved out west. Wrote me a letter once, said she had a niece. Claire's voice went quiet. "Ellie was my aunt. Raised me after my parents died. She passed away 5 years ago." Walter's eyes closed briefly. When he opened them again, there was moisture gathering at the corners. "She was my best friend. We studied together at university. Field work. She believed in protecting what mattered, even when the institutions didn't." Claire didn't speak for a moment. The cave was suddenly too quiet. "She gave me that same look once," he continued, his voice weaker now. "Right before we split ways. She told me I was too stubborn. Said one day I'd get myself in trouble trying to protect the past." He coughed, and Claire steadied him. "And yet," he whispered, "you showed up, with her blood, with her strength." Claire felt something settle inside her, as though pieces long scattered had finally found where they belonged. "Walter," she said softly, "was the site you found really that important?" He nodded, slow and deliberate. "It's not about treasure. It's about memory. The place was sacred, burial grounds, artifacts not meant for sale. Travis, he didn't care. He just saw value in dollar signs." Claire sat back, letting the reality of it all wash over hearth, fire, the betrayal, the trail that had led her here. To this man, to this cave, to this moment. "Why did Sonny come to me?" she asked, almost to herself. Walter looked at the Labrador, now dozing lightly but still alert. "Because he remembered who you are," Walter said. "Because Ellie would have told him." Claire frowned. "Told him?" Walter smiled faintly. "Maybe not with words, but dogs like Sonny, they know things. They feel them. You've got her heart. He saw it." Claire reached out and ran a hand along Sonny's thick golden fur. The dog didn't stir, but his tail gave one slow wag. She looked outside the cave. The fire was long behind them, but so was the isolation that had once defined her. Maybe fate had a longer memory than she'd believed. Snow was falling again by the time the first blue-gray light of dawn crept through the cave's narrow entrance. Claire sat with her back against the cold stone wall, arms wrapped tightly around her knees. Walter lay beside her, swaddled in blankets, still asleep but breathing steady. Sonny rested at the cave mouth like a sentinel, his golden fur dusted with fresh flakes, ears flicking with every shift in the wind. Claire's body ached from the strain of the night before, but her mind refused to quiet. Walter's revelation still rang in her ears. Ellie Donovan, her aunt, had once been Walter's dearest friend. It wasn't coincidence that brought Claire to this mountain. Sonny, fate, something older and wilderate had all converged here. Walter stirred. Claire immediately leaned toward him, offering warm water from a thermos lid. "Morning," she whispered. Walter sipped and managed a faint smile. "Still snowing?" "Like the mountains holding its breath." He looked toward the cave mouth. "I used to believe fate was just a tidy way to excuse bad planning. Now I'm not so sure." Claire gave a half smile. "Neither am I." Walter shifted slightly, wincing at the movement. "There's something you need to know, something about the site, the map." Claire nodded. "You said Travis was after it. He thinks it's just about artifacts objects he can sell. But it's more than that. Ellie and I, we didn't just document that site. We made a vow." Walter gestured toward the leather satchel beside him. Claire unbuckled it and pulled out the journal again. "The last page," Walter whispered. She flipped to the end. A brittle envelope was tucked into the back pocket, sealed with wax cracked from time. Inside was a folded piece of yellowing canvasa map drawn in faded ink and hand-labeled in tight cursive. Symbols, coordinates, a site marked by a circle of trees, a river that no longer appeared on modern topography. Claire frowned. "This isn't a normal map." Walter nodded. "It's a memory map, based not on what can be seen, but on what once was." He pointed a shaking finger to a particular set of glyphs. "These marks Cherokee syllabary. They refer to a sacred site used for generations, long before European settlers came. Ellie and I were the last to record its full perimeter. The elders let us in because we promised we wouldn't exploit it. We agreed it would never be disturbed." Claire stared at the lines, feeling a strange shiver crawl beneath her coat. "Why keep it secret?" she asked. Walter's voice dropped. "Because some things aren't meant to be unearthed. Not everything buried should be brought into the light. This site wasn't just a burial ground, it was a convergence. A place where grief was laid down like an offering. And Travis, he'd break the ground for gold." Claire folded the map gently and placed it back into the envelope. She was quiet for a moment. "Then we can't let him find it," she said. Walter nodded. "There's one more thing." He motioned for her to help him sit. Slowly, painfully, he adjusted his posture, eyes focused now with an intensity that defied his frailty. When Ellie left, she said, "If anything happened to Harif, I ever found the right person to protect the sitee should be someone who understood both fire and stillness, someone who's faced loss but not given up." Claire's brow furrowed. Walter looked at her directly. "She meant you. She didn't know your name yet, but she knew someone like you would come. And Sonny," he remembered. "That's why he came for you, why he wouldn't give up." Claire blinked, stunned. Her throat tightened, a lump rising she didn't expect. I was hiding," she said quietly. "Trying to get away from everything." "Maybe," Walter said, voice thin but certain. "But you didn't run when the fire came. You didn't walk away from an old man dying in chains. You followed the dog into the woods. That doesn't sound like hiding to me." Claire sat in silence, the weight of it all settling across her chest. Outside, Sonny stood suddenly, ears pricking to the east. "What is it, boy?" Claire rose, stepping to the entrance. A distant sound brief but clear carried across the trees. The low whine of an engine, not a snowmobile, a truck, far but approaching. Claire looked down the valley, tracks in the snow, barely visible through the swirling flakes. "He's still out there," she muttered, "and he's looking." Walter's voice came from behind. "Then you need to leave. You and Sonny. Take the map, bury it, hide it, do whatever you must. I've lived my life. This knowledge, it belongs to the right person now." Claire turned sharply. "I'm not leaving you behind." Walter's eyes were calm. "Then we do this together." Sonny stepped forward, tail low, body alert. Claire nodded slowly. "Then we move. But not away. We go to the site. If Travis wants it, we need to get there first." Walter looked at her with quiet awe. "Ellie would have liked you." "I hope so," Claire whispered, gripping the satchel tight, "because we're about to walk into the past." The climb was harder than Claire expected. The snow was deep and loose, the trees narrowing around them like sentinels watching in silence. Sonny led the way with calm focus, his golden coat flickering like firelight against the pale white canvas. Walter leaned against Claire as they moved, slower now, but determined. They were following the map, not a modern trail, but memory, instinct, and trust in a dog who had walked it once before. At times, Sonny would stop, sniff the wind, adjust slightly, then press on. It was as if the forest itself guided him. After hours of steady movement, they reached a clearing. The trees opened into a wide circle bare, wind-kissed, and untouched. Stone markers jutted from the snow like ancient teeth, half-buried but perfectly aligned in a spiral. At the center stood a large, flat rock, weathered with time, the surface etched with symbols faded almost to nothing. Walter's knees gave, and Claire helped him kneel beside the central stone. His hand brushed the carvings as though touching an old friend. "This is it," he whispered. "The place where grief was laid down, where stories were not told with words, but with wind and earth." Claire looked around, overwhelmed by the stillness. The air here was different, thicker, sacred. Sonny sat beside the stone, unmoving, like he knew they had reached the heart of something that should not be disturbed. Walter removed the folded map from the satchel and held it toward Claire. "You know what to do." Claire took it silently. There was no speech for moments like this. She crossed to a smaller stone near the tree line and dug into the snow, using her knife to scrape away frost and earth until she found soil. With bare hands, she buried the map. Not to hide it, to return it. As she pressed the earth back over the cloth, her breath caught. She felt something deep and still beneath her, like the ground itself exhaled. A weight lifted from the air. Walter smiled weakly. "She'd be proud, Ellie. She always said the land doesn't belong to us. We belong to it." Claire was about to speak when Sonny stood suddenly, ears perked. Then she heard heavy footfalls in the snow, and a voice. "You really think I wouldn't follow you?" Travis emerged from the trees like a shadow ripped from fire. His coat was dusted in snow, eyes bloodshot with exhaustion and rage. A pistol hung in his hand. He looked wild, part man, part storm. "You burned down my leverage," he spat. "That old map's mine." Claire stood protectively in front of Walter, fists clenched. "You don't understand what this place is." "I understand it's worth millions," Travis hissed. "Don't lecture me on myths and rocks." Sonny growled low, stepping forward. Travis aimed the pistol. "Move, mutt." Claire took one step forward, her voice calm but cutting. "You hurt that dog once. He still came back for the one who loved him. What did you ever come back for, Travis? Money? Control? Fear?" Travis hesitated. His hand trembled slightly. "You're too late," Claire continued. "The map is gone, buried where you'll never find it." Travis's eyes narrowed. "Then I'll dig up the truth from you." He raised the gun, but he never pulled the trigger. Sonny surged forward not with fury, but precision. He clamped onto Travis's wrist, just as Claire tackled him from behind. The gun clattered into the snow. Travis shouted, kicking wildly, but Claire had already twisted his arm behind his back, pressing his face to the ground. Sonny stood over him, breathing hard but in control, like a guardian who had waited too long for this moment. Walter, from where he sat, simply said, "The mountain doesn't forget, Travis, neither do we." Claire used the rope from her satchel to bind his hands. This time, there was no fire, no distraction, only silence. Later, under the rising moon, a forest ranger helicopter spotted their emergency beacon. By the time the rescue team landed, Walter had slipped into a peaceful doze beside the stone circle, and Travis finally sat bound to the base of a cedar tree, his breath steaming in the cold. The rangers asked questions. Claire gave answers. The sacred ground was recorded, yes, but its coordinates were never spoken aloud. Only Claire and Walter knew where it lay. And Sonny. Weeks passed. Then months. Walter was moved to a warm facility in Asheville, where historians and tribal liaisons came to hear his stories and confirm his accounts. Charges were brought against Travis Granger. Unlawful imprisonment, arson, theft of cultural property. Claire stayed in the mountains. She rebuilt the cabin stronger, quieter, more open to the light. Sonny stayed, too, his paws no longer stiff with pain, his eyes always watching the trail, as if expecting Ellie to appear from the woods at any moment. One spring afternoon, Claire returned to the stone circle. She brought wildflowers. Not to disturb, just to remember. Sunny sat beside her in the tall grass, golden fur rippling in the breeze. And for a long time, neither of them said anything. Because some places don't need words. Only presence. Only promise. Only peace. Some truths are not meant to be uncovered, they are meant to be protected. In a world obsessed with discovery and possession, Whispers in the Snow reminds us that legacy is not just what we find, but what we choose to safeguard. Claire learned that the real strength lies not in running from pain, but in standing still long enough to face it. And Sunny Brave, loyal Sunny, taught us that sometimes a dog doesn't just guard a person, he guards their soul's direction. When history calls out from the cold, it's not asking to be sold. It's asking to be remembered. If this story moved you, leave a comment and tell us what moment touched your heart most. And if you've ever had an animal guide you through a dark time, we'd love to hear about it. Let their stories echo with ours.